Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to the latest episode of the Genesys Cloud Community's Q&A show, the show where we answer your pressing questions in the Genesys Cloud online community. My name is Matt Lawson. I'm your online community manager. And today, well, if you've been following this season, you know exactly what we're doing. We're celebrating the 50th episode of the Q&A show. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you. I didn't know if we'd make it past the pilot of this, but here we are 50 episodes in, and it's really cool to celebrate this milestone because not only do we get to record it in general, but I also get to record it in my old office. So this is actually where I sat down and recorded the pilot at this point almost 3 years ago. I don't know how long ago. And it's been a wild journey. Thank you all so much for watching and tuning in. Thank you so much for my team for supporting this. And for everybody who's ever been on the show, thank you so much for the time, whether you submitted a question, whether you helped us answer a question or do a demo. It's when people say the show would not be possible without you, I now truly sit in a place where I understand exactly what that means. And I'm forever grateful because I've had some of the best times in my professional career doing this show. So thank you all for joining when you do. And getting ready for this episode, I had a lot of people ask, what are we going to do? It's, 50 episodes. It's no small deal. And I wanted to go back to the roots of the show because this show wouldn't have been possible without a lot of people. But the first person that always comes to my mind is none other than George Ganahl. When we got this show started, George was the very first person to say he'd help contribute. He's been an incredible colleague, friend, mentor. And when it comes to a milestone like this, there's nobody I'd rather spend my time with. And I don't even care what we talk about. I'm just glad that I get to be with him. So George, thank you for everything you've done to help this show. And thank you for everything you're going to do in this episode, because I have no doubt you'll be sharing some great wisdom with the people who are tuning in. So George, welcome to the show. Let's answer some questions.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again. 50 episodes. I feel like you've been on at least half of them.
Wow.
For those of you who, if this is your first time seeing George, he is a storied figure in Genesys. You've been working on Genesys Cloud literally since before it was customer facing, right?
Yeah.
You were in the education section for a long time. And now, of course, you're over in pro services, and along the way, while you were in education, you also were the very first community manager at Genesys for the Pure Connect community.
Wow.
And that was what, like almost 17 years ago?
Something like that. Yeah. Been a while.
Wild, man. You've had an incredible journey at Genesys. And I know you're really close to 5,000 replies in the community. I should check today to see if you've hit that milestone. I know you're dangerously close.
No, not yet.
Not yet. But the question I had for you is, when you think about all of that experience, everything you've done, what's been your favorite part of working at Genesys or in the community, however you want to answer it?
That's kind of a crazy thing, and it's going to sound odd, I know. Way back when I very first joined in March of 1999, there was a guy in the company named Jeff Gerardo who loved to play games. And one of his games was this frat thing of the Milk Challenge. Now I'm brand new in the company. I've been in the company maybe 3 weeks, and this whole thing is going around about, the Milk Challenge, the Milk Challenge. You got to drink a gallon of milk in under an hour, and then you got to hold it all in for another hour.
Oh, no.
And the developers loved it. So crazy me, I don't know, it's impossible. So I just went ahead and I actually completed the Milk Challenge.
Okay.
I bring this up because that was March of 99.
Right.
It opened every developer's door to me in the company.
You earned your stripes.
These guys, I was notorious now because I'm the guy that beat the Milk Challenge. I could walk into any developer's office and ask questions and get to know people. I still have guys from then who are now VP level or whatever. And then I still get called Milkman by some just because of that bond from way back then. I would not be here today doing what I do if it had not been for that Milk Challenge. It sounds crazy, but that opened so many doors and built so many relationships that are still going today that helped me in my job.
That's cool, man. I appreciate that story. Today, we do get to record the 50th episode, and I know you have a topic prepared for us. What did you plan on talking about?
Today, I was going to dig into something called developer tools, because even though it has that name developer in it, it really is a useful utility for most anybody who's managing Genesys cloud system, or even some people at lower levels in the IT side, whatever. There's some tools that are really useful for people to check on stuff that you can't just easily get in the regular supervisor UI or things like that. So I'm going to show how to get it actually running within the Genesys Cloud user interface instead of having to go through a separate website, which most people do. And there's some different ways to use it to test things, to check on things, what have you. So what I have here, Matt, is the standard user interface. And to get to these developer tools, the first thing someone would need to do is to go ahead and install them. So I'll run quickly over that. In integrations, they can just add an integration and search for the developer tools. So just search dev and click install. I'm not going to reinstall it. It's a third-party app. People who are licensed for the product can install this because I've already installed it.
It's interesting. Why is it labeled as a third-party app?
So it's third-party in the sense that it's not built into the system directly. So it has to be installed as an integration.
Gotcha.
And it's just kind of weird because we're integrating to our own system, I know.
Right.
But the API calls are going from the client over to Genesys Cloud and being used that way.
Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying.
So once it's installed, I'll edit it briefly. What you would normally do is go into the configuration and add a group within your system that tells it which people are allowed to access this app within the user interface. You can select everybody if you want, all employees, but normally you're going to limit it to a specific group, like I have an admin group. And then that's about all the configuration you do. And then you would, in this interface, turn it on to make it active. So there's just a little slider. If it's inactive, then nobody can use it. If it's active, then people can use it. And once you install it, you would refresh your screen, and then you can find it under the apps menu. So there may be one or more apps installed, but in this case, I only have the Pure Cloud Developer Tools installed on this system. Once you're in there, this has the full Developer Tools menu that you could get by going to developer.mypurecloud.com. So it has various tools that are available for people to use. You can, like I said, you can find them on the Developer Resource Center. But here I'm actually accessing them within my own client, which makes it a little bit easier because on the Developer Center, you have to log in as a specific user. You have to manage that. If I'm doing it all within Genesys Cloud, I don't have to worry about the extra step of authenticating and making sure I'm logged in. And because I always forget to log in, then I got to go back and redo everything. Built in makes it a lot easier. So it's installed. It's now running. I want to take a quick look at a few of these different applications or these tools that are in the developer tools. First one, I'm going to take a look at the API Explorer. And in here, this is a front end to the entire API, public API for Genesys Cloud. I'm just going to look at a couple of them real quick. There's so many that I can't begin to cover all of them. One that I use is under analytics. I'm looking at queue information, and I'm going to do this queue observation. Just a quick comment here. In this sidebar, it's going to tell me all the different configuration settings that could be used in this body. There's also another version of this tool on the Developer Center, which kind of walks you through by choosing from dropdowns and whatever. This one expects you to put in an actual body. So for myself, and I'm not showing this off screen, but I have queries stored on the side because I don't feel like retyping them every time. So I'm going to copy one, paste it in. And this is just a simple query to get some information about a particular queue. So I've got the queue ID matches this, and I'm going to pull up some metrics. How many users are on queue, routing statuses, how many interactions are waiting in queue, that kind of thing. So I send the request, get it back, and right there, I've got some information about the queue. You can see how many users are in different statuses. So I got one person interacting, got two people off queue. I've got some 0 people zero voice interactions waiting, zero chat, so on. So I can just get a real quick thumbnail sketch of what's going on in this queue. Yes, I could go into the performance menus, look at a dashboard, great. But what if I'm building a third-party app that wants this information? It would have to do this API query and get it back to be able to build that third-party application. So I can test a query here, and then I can copy this body over and put it into my third-party app and run the same kind of query after authenticating. So that's one quick example. Another one that people use is the IP ranges query. So under utilities, start typing up here and it actually goes and finds the location that has the type of thing you want to do. When you're opening firewall settings on your IT environment, you need to know which IP ranges or which IP addresses our requests are coming from on Genesys Cloud so that those can be opened up. And the way people are told to do it is go and get this IP ranges query and run it from the API Explorer is the easiest way. So here I can just see US East 1 is the region that my organization is in. So for data actions, it's got some IP address ranges for audio hook, if we're using that, for SMTP, if we're using that, all these different things. So I've got the address ranges that would then need to be opened up on the firewall, depending on what we're using in our company. So that's just a little quick tidbit there that people use fairly often. And then one more I wanted to look at. I want to look at how to get the estimated wait time for a queue, because maybe you're just wanting to real quick look that up. You can do it through the admin menu, go into actions, but you can also do it here under the routing options, under queues. I can get estimated wait time for a particular queue. And first thing I need to go get the queue ID, which is the same one as we just used in our other queue query. So I'm just going to copy that from my little cheat sheet off on the side that you can't see. And I'll put in a media type. Let's say I want to check how long an email takes to get to an agent. I send the request, and there we go. Right now, the estimated wait time for that queue for email happens to be 1,216 seconds. Just a quick thing that people like to check sometimes just to verify how their routing is set up, how things are performing. You could get estimated wait time, you get service levels, you get other things through this API Explorer real quick. This is not something you can see in the performance menus. It's not on the dashboard anyplace. So the only way to get it right now is through an API query. So those are three little things just real quick to show you in the API Explorer.
Real quick, George, in your time as a teacher and now in pro services, the three things that you showed, I would assume those are the most asked about or the most requested. Is there anything that this search is missing that you frequently have to tell people, like you're looking in the wrong place for that API, or is everything pretty much found here?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. In the API Explorer here and within the developer tools on the client side, you just have all the basic tools. If you want a lot more detailed information and really want to search for something, then you should go to the Developer Center, which is developer.mypeercloud.com. You can tell I've got it in my browser. I go there quite often. And here you can access those API tools again, the developer tools. You can also search for stuff. So, for example, that estimated wait time, you can go find a whole overview of it. The improved estimated wait time out there on the Developer Center talks about how it's calculated, gets way more in depth on what's behind the API call. Also on the Developer Center, you can find all kinds of tutorials. You can find examples of how to write some different code. If you want to, you can once again do that API Explorer stuff. And it looks a little bit different in this version. If I want to go look for estimated wait time again, then I just type in estimated. Oh, look, there's the query that I ran in the other API Explorer within the client. So you can get to all the queries, all the APIs within the API Explorer here and get a ton more information throughout the Developer Center. Or if you pretty much know what you're doing already and you just want to do something quick, if you fire up the developer tools within the client interface, it's just a real quick way to get to the basics. So yeah, for somebody who wants a lot more information, go to the Developer Center to learn and then use the tools here in the user interface just for quick stuff. So one more little area I'd like to show here in the API Explorer is this audit functionality. And quick side note, under the admin section, you can pull up the audit information at the bottom. There's a little pop-up that you can get to, and you can choose what service you want to look at, and you can see some basic information right here. But you don't get a whole bunch of information in the admin tool. People usually want a lot more info, and that is gathered through this audit API call. There are a couple of different versions of it. There's a quick one, which will let you go back 14 days total. And then there's another one which actually builds a query, which gets sent out, does a job, they call it, and then you have to go back later and get the results. You can do a much longer, deeper query, goes back as far as you want, getting about 30 days at a time, but it's much more detailed as far as the time ranges you can look at. I'm going to do a real quick one and just look at the past, not quite 14 days for a particular queue. And here, once again, we have a body. I'm going to go back into my little stash on the side and copy the body that I've got stored because I like to keep example bodies for these different queries set aside. I've got the date, time, interval. Contact center is what I'm looking at for the service. Entity ID, so I have a queue ID in there, and then the entity type is queue. You have to make sure and put an entity type with the entity ID. Send the request, and here it gives a whole lot more information than what we just saw in the admin interface. So it gives deeper information on when things were changed, what happened. We added some groups onto this queue down here, modified some settings throughout, whatever. So a lot more detailed information on what was done, what happened. Now, if you want to know who did it, that's real simple. It's user 7310, whatever up here. Doesn't have a name. So that's a segue into the next thing I'd like to show. I'll copy this user ID. And there's a handy dandy little search icon over here in the sidebar. So these are all the developer tools. This one is the search functionality. I want to figure out who that user is. So need to come down here. I've got filters to set up. First one I want to set up is the ID that I'm going to search for. And I just paste in here that ID I copied from that audit query. You notice it builds out a query on the fly for the body up there. Execute it. I can see real quick, oh, it's Graham Alexander. He's the one that made the changes. I need to go talk to him to figure out why he did what he did, why he broke the system, whatever it might be. So those two going hand in hand are a pretty quick little handy tool to get detailed information on changes made in the system and then figure out who actually made those changes based upon that ID at the top of the return. Another quick tool I'd like to look at is our analytics query builder. It's over here in the sidebar, little graph looking thing. And I'm not going to get into how to use this thing in detail, but the basics, you put in a date time range, you choose how to sort, and then you put in some filters to designate exactly what you want to look at. In this case, it's a conversation detail. So usually you'll add in a conversation ID and then go look at a specific conversation to get details on it. You can also do other filters, segment filters, other things. You also have multiple types of queries you can do. Conversation aggregates actually lets you get information about multiple conversations. So piecing them together with a kind of a SQL where clause type of query. You can get flow information, flow aggregate, flow observation. That has to do with the various milestones and other things you have set up in your architect flows and pull information out regarding those. There's queue observation, lets you pull out metrics regarding a queue and group those together. There's user status aggregate if you want to pull in information about different user statuses, multiple users, for example, what have you. User observation if you want to see, okay, what are the active queues, members, different things. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the details on these. The only one I'm going to look at a little bit further is this user detail. So for example, if you want to try and figure out what a specific user was doing during a specific time frame, maybe they're claiming they can't pick up interactions, or maybe interactions are routing to them, but they're not picking them up, or other things are happening. In this case, I can get a lot of routing status and presence type information. What was their status as far as available, on queue, off queue, whatever, and then what was their routing status at a particular time. So if I want to, I can go back in here. I've got a user I can put in. So I want to do this user filter, add a predicate. I can choose the dimension is the user ID. That's the only dimension you can choose. And you actually get a drop-down list of users to look at. I have one user that I'm working with in these examples, Diane Albertson. Execute the query, and I can see during this date time range, what was her presence? She was offline, then she logged in, went available, then went on queue at this time, went back to available, on queue again, back to available, and so on. So I can get some real specific information for specific date times. There's a start time and end time for each of these. This one, starting time, because she's actually on queue and interacting right now. So the last one does not have an end time. But that can be real useful when you're trying to track down what a specific agent was doing or why interactions are not routing properly. When you thought somebody was on queue and you find out, oh, wait a minute, they actually went not responding during this time, or they went off queue or whatever. And you can then take that information back and tell the supervisors why the agents weren't answering interactions, let's say. But that's just a real quick tool, a whole bunch of stuff in that analytics query builder. Helps you build a lot of the information you can see in the performance menus. But once again, if you're doing it from a third-party app, it helps you build a body to be able to do the query to be able to then display it in your third-party app.
That's really cool. How would you take the tools that you're showing us now and, and then really expand them for whoever your customer is? Is there like what kind of added benefit is there for, hiring somebody from professional services to help with these things? Or is the biggest benefit just simply, where all the tools are, how to use them, and you can get up and running pretty quick?
It really depends on the level of expertise of the customer and who they have on staff. So for a large company, a lot of times they'll have somebody who can understand how to use the API, but maybe they're not familiar with our API calls and they're not familiar with these particular tools. So to start with, a lot of times I will just give a little bit of on-the-job training to somebody on how to use these tools so that they can, the old adage, teach a man to fish so that he can feed himself kind of thing, rather than having to come to me every time. There are other times where, because I'm doing a lot of troubleshooting for a customer as they're doing deployments, they'll ask me questions about why things happened, and I'll often dig into these tools to pull up information that I'll then use when I answer the questions about why things happened. Along the same lines, though, I'll try to teach them how to use the tool so that instead of asking me every time, they can do it themselves and not have to spend their precious dollars on a PS consultant just doing troubleshooting for them. If they can do it themselves, that's much better, and let me concentrate on better things on the technical consulting side. So yeah, it's to my advantage to teach people how to use these tools, but that's a ramp up period. And then on my own side, there are a lot of times where I'll be trying to put together something to show them, and I'll need to troubleshoot my own work as I'm putting together a demonstration. And these tools can be really useful as I'm trying to figure out what might be going wrong as I'm setting something up.
Anything else you want to demonstrate?
Yeah, I want to go through just a few more things fairly quickly. I don't want to suck up a lot of time, but just give some tips and tricks here. Now, one thing that I find actually fairly useful, but there is this notifications section in here. And this is useful in that it allows you to see notifications that are being sent out by the system in these various topics. And just getting real technical for a second, these are WebSockets topics. So somebody can actually set up a listener on their side, kind of on the web, a web service that listens for these notifications. And they subscribe to specific things that they want to listen to, whether it's users or conversations or whatever. So they can actually get notifications when things happen. And then on their own back end side, they can have little triggers that run code in the back end, or they can log things, they can keep track of stuff. It's for people who use this, it's really handy. And then having this ability just to see what the messages are real quick here enables people to know what to actually program their back end to look for. A little pitch there for notifications. A little example here. Let's say I want to know when users are getting on conversations. Well, in this interface here, I'm going to look up a particular user here. Let's say, well, I'm not going to use emails. I'm going to do calls. I'm just going to show what if I call a user. And I have another user logged in. I'm going to go get that user's ID real quick. Once again, off screen. I've got a subscription. I'm going to put in this user ID, subscribe. Okay, so now I've got subscribe topics, conversations, calls for that user. I'm going to clear these notifications. And now I'm actually going to call that user. So it's Diane. I've got her in my past history because I call her a lot. And you can see right away, it pops up in this sidebar that there's all this information about the call. So I can see right away, here are events that happened, the call came in, here's information about the call, all kinds of stuff in here that is information that you can gather on the back end using a listener that's listening for these notifications, and people find all kinds of wonderful things to do with this information. That's the notification section. A couple other little things real quick. There's a web chat section, which I think is kind of cool. This actually lets you test out your web chat configuration. Now, this is the older style of web chat. This is not the new messaging style of web chat, but if you have the older configuration where you have the widgets set up, I've got one for customer service chat, goes into this customer service queue. You can put in a name for the person that's contacting, and then you can sample how this would work. So I'm going to put myself on queue real quick, start the chat. It's got a little chat window here, and you notice it's popping up in my client. I could add this person to my contacts if I wanted. I can choose the customer service, canned messages, got a greeting, throw that in there, send that message, it pops up. And now I'm testing, I'm noticing that, oh, wait a minute, it says, hi, Smith, Frank. I don't like that. I'll have to go back and actually change my little widget to make sure that things are, or actually that's the canned response. Got to change my canned response to make it work a little bit better. You'll notice that it says John Smith here. Why? Because my user actually in the profile has John Smith set up as their chat name, their agent name. So they're not exposing their real name to the public, something that they do a lot in contact centers. So I can practice chatting back and forth, make sure the chat works, see what it's going to look like on the customer side and my side and so on. That's just a little cool thing there. So one more little thing I'd like to look at in this kind of genre of testing things, we've got this create callback section, and I can put in a name, a phone number, date, and time. So right now it's 11:42. I could put in like 11:43 as the date time. I can create callbacks, and that will dump callbacks into the queue. They will route at the time that it's set up here. And if I've got somebody on queue, then I could actually receive those callbacks and practice placing the callbacks. If I look at the performance menu, I've actually dumped a few of them into queue already. You'll see that I've got all these callbacks now sitting there in queue. Really cool. If I wanted the agent to log in and take them, that would be great. I could sample it. In this case, I wanted to create a different example. I dumped them into a queue where this agent cannot handle callbacks. So let's say it's a real world situation. Somebody by mistake allowed some interactions to get into a queue. Let's say they're doing testing. A lot of times this will happen during testing. They dump a bunch of interactions into a queue, and then they realize, oh, we don't have any agents that can take those interactions, or maybe they dumped way more than they really wanted into the queue. And now they just want to disconnect all those interactions. Well, okay, I could go one by one and I could copy the interaction ID and take it over to the admin and do the disconnect. Or I could use another feature of the developer tools. And I like this one a lot because it's just real handy for testing code or for doing something like I'm going to do now, which is disconnect interactions. There's what's called the code editor. And in this code editor, you can paste in basic code. Like in this case, it's Node.js, We're using that SDK. And I have in here a utility that somebody created that allows you to go through a queue and delete a bunch of interactions at the same time. So like I said, you get a whole bunch of interactions in a queue, emails, chats, whatever. You can come in in this case, I've got code, a script that I can use to go and disconnect all of them. And it's pretty simple. I've got a queue name. This one says customer service. So I actually need to change that to the name of the queue that all of these interactions are in, CGR Q1 live chat. And I put in a date time range. So this goes basically today to tomorrow. The type of media is callback because I just want to disconnect the callbacks. And this code will go through, and I'm not going to explain it all, but it basically goes through, finds the ID for the queue, and then it loops through the queue and finds all the conversations and deletes them all. So got the code in here, I click run, and it will delete all those interactions. You see here, it dumps a bunch of information into the screen. That's part of the API return. And if I scroll to the bottom, you'll see deleting conversations. So it's got all these conversations it found, deleted. If I go back into the queue, I can see now that all those conversations are gone. So my testing is done. I've deleted all the conversations. The queue's clean again. I don't have to go through each one and disconnect it individually or answer them all and get rid of them that way. So to me, that's a pretty handy utility. You can do all kinds of stuff, though, if you want to test what your scripts are going to do. You build your JavaScript code. You want to test it before you put it in your application. You can test it in here and just make sure it all works. And then when you put it in your own backend application, you have to add in all of the authentication stuff at the front, but the rest of the code you could just copy and paste over once you know it runs. So that's just a real handy utility that I find. And basically, that's my main tour through all these developer tools, the main ones I find useful, some tips and tricks. Hopefully folks out there will find ways to use these things and just make their own lives better. They've made mine better.
George, I know we've done a lot together. I want you to promise me this isn't the end of the road for us.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Excellent. Well, I hope to see you again on an episode that isn't a milestone. Thank you so much for the tutorial that you did today. Thank you for everything you've done in the past. I don't know what more to say other than thank you. The community loves you. I love you. And the Q&A show really loves you. So thank you for everything, friend.
Can I give one last thing? You know me. I'm the hat guy, right?
You are.
And this one's kind of special to me. Notice it says USS Chicago on it. This is a shout out to a good friend of mine named Jesse Brown. He served honorably on the Chicago way back in the day, but then he also served on the Battleship New Jersey, which is how I got to know him. And just, he's the kind of friend, he gave me this USS Chicago hat. Now I've traded other stuff back and forth with him over the years. And, you know, I got to wear a hat at some point in our 50th episode, right? And like I said, I wanted to give a little bit of honor to another veteran and a guy who's just been a great friend over the years.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. It really has been a lot of fun for me. And genuinely, it wouldn't have been possible without you. So thank you so much, George. All right, everyone, that concludes this week's show. Don't worry, there was a fair amount of time in between the last one and this one. I don't think we'll have to wait that long again for a little while. So we'll be back soon. I'm not sure what the topic will be, but as always, we do have an email, qashow@genesys.com. It's just simply qashow@genesys.com. No spaces, no dots, no nothing. And let us know if you have any questions or topics that you'd like to see covered in a future episode. Otherwise, I'll talk to you then. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in for this week's episode. We hope it was helpful and maybe a little bit entertaining. Each week, our host and experts review community discussions and debate what content to discuss, so your voice matters. Did we miss something? Do you have a question for the show? Let us know. Join the conversation at the Genesys online community. As a Genesys customer or partner, you can create an account. Just click the sign-in button found on most pages and follow the necessary instructions to create an account. Also, feel free to email us at qashow@genesys.com. We'd love to hear from you. If this is your first episode, welcome. You can view our entire archives. Go to the Helpful Links panel found on most community pages and find the QA show archive that interests you.
Also, check out the community's prize wall for current contests and previous winners.
We appreciate your support of the show and the community. Cheers!